Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. On today's episode, we have a solo mission. We are here to discuss the post-race recap of the Brazos Bend 100. You guys that have been following the journey for a while know that I've been chasing this 100-mile dream for almost 3 years. You're well aware of my shortcomings and my flaws or faults within this challenge. I've failed it twice. If you listen to the pre-race episode, I kind of went into detail of what those first experiences looked like and why I continue to step back into this arena and face this challenge. But I'm here today because we've obviously completed that 100-mile distance. I'd said in the pre-race episode, if you don't see me again, it's because I'm dead or I failed. And I really meant that. I kind of went into this experience in this race where it was like, I'm either going to do this thing or we're going to completely shift our life goals and where we're headed. I needed to put that much pressure on it, and it worked. We're here. So to dive into that week leading up to the race and through the race, I wanted to kind of give the full picture. So in life, you can plan everything out, especially if you're an overthinker, to the absolute T. You can put everything in place that needs to be in place. You can, cross the T's, dot the I's, everything, all of it. Life doesn't really care, though. Life is going to show up how it wants to show up, when it wants to show up, and you have to be ready to adapt. And so the week leading up to the race, it was a lot of that. We had some recordings to get done for the podcast. I had some weird aches and pains going into my taper week that I was a little unsure of. Had some stuff happening in the background that was a little bit distracting. And all these things were just compounding. A lot of it had to do with directly me, right? Things that I'd put in motion or put in place and done incorrectly that was creating more stress around the race. So leading up to it, you're supposed to be hydrating to the max. You're supposed to be carb loading about 3-4 days out. You start your carb load. So it'll go like 600 grams to 500 grams to 400 grams to 300 grams to race. And your sleep is probably the most important thing. So all three of those things on race week, I fell short in. I wasn't hydrating the way I should. I didn't really have much of an appetite, and my sleep was trash. And it just compounded. And the more stressed you get about those things or not hitting those marks, the worse they get a lot of times. So I think, the race was starting on Saturday at 6:30 a.m. By Thursday, I was at the race location. I'd driven down there. I recorded here that morning. And I had a long conversation on the way into town for the race. And it was with a close friend. And he basically was just like, look, you're going to have to learn to compartmentalize right here, right now. Like, you've put 3 years into this event. What are you willing to let distract you from completing this goal, if anything? And I had to recenter myself. I went and I forced myself to eat a large amount of food. I got back on top of my hydration. I think, probably starting Tuesday night through Friday, I'd slept cumulatively maybe 12 hours. So I wasn't sleeping for shit, for a lack of better words. I wasn't sleeping good at all. And so I started to compartmentalize all these things. And I was like, okay, number one goal right now is to finish this race. It's to hammer this goal. There's people watching. There's kids watching. You've talked about this long enough, and it's time to kind of put up or shut up. And so I was able to eat a lot of food Thursday night. I picked up one of my pacers from the airport in Houston. We went back to the Airbnb, got a decent night's rest Thursday night. I think I slept like 5.5, maybe 6 hours, which was the most I'd had in 3 days. And woke up Friday morning and was like, okay, this 24-hour clock starts going off in your head. Like, in 24 hours, we're going to bust this thing loose. Like, we're going to be all in. And so that kind of narrows the focus. It helps you compartmentalize even deeper. I wasn't on my phone. I kind of just put my phone off to the side and wanted to do everything in my control to prepare myself for the next morning. So that day, I woke up, got some food in me, got some coffee in me, Kind of sat around for a while, took it easy, nothing too crazy. Ended up going and picking up my race packet and doing my shakeout run on course, on site. And just a quick 20-minute run, so 10 minutes out, 10 minutes back. Got back, we set up the tent for camp the next day and left there and went back to the Airbnb. And got back to the Airbnb and tried to lock in. You know, I kind of put down all distractions. I was like, all right, nothing else matters now. It's time to do this, and send it, essentially, with everything you got and see what happens. You know, I didn't want to walk away from it with excuses. And that happened the first 2 years. So moving through the day Friday, my other pacer would end up showing up Friday evening, probably 6, 7 o'clock. We would eat dinner as a group. So it was me, my buddy AJ, who flew in from Virginia, my buddy Brett, who you guys have seen on the show. We're all at the Airbnb, we're eating, we're going through a little bit of pre-race strategy, but overall just locked in. And we sat around and talked for probably an hour after that, and then it was time to go to bed. So it was off to bed, and I fell asleep, but I woke up at probably 10:15 that night, Friday night, and was like, something was telling me, like, wake up. It was weird. It was like, wake up, go check your phone. And I'm like, I'm not going to check my phone. I'm not doing this again. Like, when I check my phone, a lot of times I'll end up in a rabbit hole, whether that's on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook. But something kept nudging me to do that. So I went and I looked at my phone, and one of the things that I'd been stressing for a few days was right there in my phone. And the answer was right there. And I was like, oh, okay. So I chalked that up to a God thing. God was giving me some peace in that moment. So I put my phone down, went to bed, and the alarm was set for 3:30, 3:35, I think, Saturday morning. The race didn't start till 6:30, but anybody who runs knows you need to get ahead of the curve as far as waking up. You need to get up, get your coffee in you, get some food in you, handle your business, if you know what I'm saying. Get dressed, pack the bags, make sure everything's set up for success. So did all that. And we went to the race, got there probably about 5:15, and took a shuttle into camp. And I kind of made a decision in camp before we set out to start the race that I wasn't going to listen to music. I'd thought about it, and the previous 2 years going into these types of races, I had music at the start line. I was all amped up. I was all fired up. But the purpose of this race, you know, it kind of shifted, and it was like, we're here to learn about ourselves. We're here to learn, like, what we're built of, how we're made, and what we're capable of. So I decided in the camp, I'm going to listen to music up until it's gun time, and then I'm going to put the music down. I'm going to leave my phone in here. It's just going to be me and the trail. Well, this race setup is, you do 6 loops. Each loop is roughly 16 and a half miles. And so you end up over 100 miles regardless, but each loop you get to come back into camp. You get to see your crew, your pacers, which they can't pick you up until after the 3rd loop, but you get to see everybody. You get to eat something, change shoes and socks if you need to, whatever you need to do to freshen up to head out for the next loop. So I was pretty comfortable with that distance, knowing, like, if I made the wrong decision in camp, I could do anything to get 16 miles to get back and adjust. So we went to the start line, gun goes off, and we're off. And I had a pace strategy going into the race, because I knew the first 3 laps I'd be alone. So my pace strategy was like, let me go for right around the 3 hour and 10-minute mark for the first lap, and then we'll see how we feel, and then we'll plan out our second lap. So I set off. I didn't carry a hydration pack in the back. I carried just 2 flasks in the front and some BP and Go Gels. That was my fuel between aid stations, and at aid stations, I was like, I'll just eat whatever they have, whatever looks good or whatever I can get down, and try to keep my carb intake up. And so each aid station there was probably between 4 and 6 miles. I think one might have been even closer. It was water only, for a total of, I think, 4 total aid stations on the course, including the start-finish line. So we set out. First lap was pretty smooth. I was reserved. I was holding back. I was being smart. It's a really flat course. There's only 2 hills on the whole loop. And I walked those hills intentionally, but my my run strategy was I'm going to run for a mile and then I'm going to walk for a minute every single mile for the first loop. That was my plan. So we set out and we accomplished that on the first loop. Come back in probably about 9:30, 9:45 a.m. Cruise there, feeling pretty good. Feeling like I just ran 16 miles, which doesn't feel the best, doesn't feel the worst. It just kind of is. Came in, spent probably 5-10 minutes in camp, got some food in me, some warm food, which was fantastic. I needed that. Refilled on my flasks, and still no caffeine up into this point. I'd stayed away from caffeine. I also, when I came in, I was like, let me get ahead of the pain, because sometimes in these events, if you let the pain start and then you start taking, ibuprofen or naproxen or whatever, you can't catch back up. The pain stays ahead of the painkiller. So I took a couple Tylenol and set back off. And when I told him, I was like, look, this one's going to be a little slower. My goal this time out is to every half mile walk a minute. And I was like, that should put me back here at like 4.5 hours. So I was thinking I'd be back about 1:32. So I set off, did that. This lap, it got interesting. My quads started seizing up. They started locking up on the inner quad. So like where your kneecap is at, one of the quad heads is just to the inside of that. They started seizing up. They started cramping, which was interesting for me. I'd never really dealt with that much in training. I'd felt everything else, but that was very new to me. I haven't felt that since probably playing football. And that was usually from squatting down and standing up, that movement over and over again. A lot of times that muscle would lock up. So I just tried to move through it. I upped my salt intake. I drank more fluids, probably too many fluids. I probably overhydrated. If you've been in this scenario, you know what that looks like. I was pissing probably every 10 minutes and it was clear, and that's too much, right? That means you've got too much fluid, not enough retention. And so I dealt with that whole second lap, but I stayed on pace. I did what I needed to do to get back into camp between 1:30 and 2. So I get back in, that's at 33 miles. And my mindset at that point was like, okay, we're a third of the way through the race. This next lap gets, I finish it. If I get back, I get a pacer. I get to link up with one of my buddies. That's going to make all the difference in the world. That's going to take a lot of the pressure off, a lot of the stress off. And so that was my whole focus that next lap. And it was to get in before dark. I wanted to get past the 50-mile mark before 12 hours and before dark. And so I just focused in on that. I was like, okay, that's this pace. This is what I need to do to hit that. And I was probably between 14 and 15 minutes a mile on that third lap. Took me about 5 hours, a little over 5 hours. And I just kind of took my time and played it smart. It really, at the end of the day, was about getting back to my pacers under 12 hours and knowing that gave us 20 hours to finish the next half of the race. So that's what I did. I put that into play. I went out and I attacked that next 16 miles and got back into camp at the 50-mile mark and had the opportunity to pick up my first pacer, which was my buddy AJ. Also at this time, another one of our friends showed up, Matt Ritchie. Matt's from the Austin area. He's actually been on this podcast too. And he's incredible when it comes to crewing for these types of events. He just knows what to do, what to say, how to show up. And that's what he did. He kind of came in and took the reins over and was just kind of like, this is how we're going to do this. This is what you need. Try to do this. He was just on top of it. Real energetic guy. So I think he brought a lot of energy right when we needed it. And AJ and I were able to set out on that fourth loop with a good head of steam, a good bit of momentum, feeling pretty good. And I told him, headed out of camp, I'm going to set the pace. But what I'm thinking is, we'll run for a half mile, walk for, a minute, so forth and so on until I can't hold that anymore. And then we'll start to back it down. That probably lasted 5, 6, 7 miles. And around that point, we shifted and went to this strategy of run 2 minutes, walk a minute. And by the end of that loop, we were running a minute, walking a minute. And so we get in from that loop, and that was right around mile 66, mile 67. And that was a PR for me. I hadn't made it that far in the first two races or first two attempts. And I remember sitting there thinking like, okay, there's 2 loops left after this. My body definitely feels it, feels exactly how you would imagine after 66, 67 miles. Feet are pretty destroyed. I took my shoes off and socks off for the first time. And when I did that, let me just tell you, I saw something I never seen before. I never dreamed of what I was looking at. It was disgusting. And the people close to me got pictures of it. They've seen it. It's not the prettiest sight, but there was probably 12 big blisters on my feet, in between my toes, on the back of my toes. I had one that was probably, it looked like the size of like a lima bean times 5. It was disturbing. This is where Matt Ritchie comes into play, though. Shout out to my boy Matt. Matt's like, I got your feet, bro. I got your feet. I'll take care of them. And I was laid out on this cot, and he popped all my blisters, wrapped all my toes, basically put biofreeze from the quad all the way down to the ankle, took a massage gun, got active in my legs, handled everything to the point where I was like, all right, quads were still locked up, but I feel like I can move. And I told AJ, I was like, this is the lap right here. This is the one that's either going to make us or break us, period. And he's like, all right, let's go, let's get to work. And I knew that this lap was going to decide everything. This would be the 5th lap. So it would be mile, call it 67 to 84, 85, something like that. And I took poles for the first time. I took poles out on the course, and I've tried that in the first 2 races, like trekking poles, and I've come to the conclusion that they don't work for me. They suck. I tried to use them on that lap for the first few miles, but it was hell, man. Everything started to lock up. Everything got tight. I kind of lost my momentum. The other thing that happens around this time is it gets really dark. So it got super dark, literally and figuratively. You're out in the middle of the woods. It starts pouring down rain. The temperatures plummet, and you enter a new atmosphere. And I think this is really where the race happens, in my opinion. It's when you're at your lowest. It's when you have to face this thought of like, holy shit, I don't know if I can do this. Like, that thought definitely crept into my mind. And I was probably walking 20, 30 steps, stopping, bending over. AJ was doing his best to keep me moving, to keep me on top of it. I don't think I could have, I know I wouldn't have finished this race without all 3 of those guys, being Matt, Brett, and AJ. But AJ was huge on this lap. He was patient with me. He kind of just said the right things, gave me the right motivation. But I could also see, what a lot of people don't know is he was going to PR his distance on that lap, just pacing me. And that was a big deal. And so that was something else that kept me going, was like, I want to see him hit his PR. I want to see him hit his goal. So I have to keep going. And at the halfway point, there's a turnaround. And then there's another checkpoint probably 3 miles after that. We got to that checkpoint, and because of the raining and the flooding, they had switched the course. And so to add fuel to fire, it was like, shit, we're exhausted. The course really isn't marked that well. To be honest, like, this specific race, the aid station sucked. I'm just keeping it all the way a buck. Like, this wasn't what I was used to as far as Tejas Trails. Tejas Trails is awesome. This is not that. And so there wasn't that much hot food. The people were super nice at the aid stations. They were amazing. They were incredible. The volunteers were off the chain. But like, as far as hot food options and that sort of thing, there was like ramen at maybe 1 of them or 2 of them, which was great. I appreciated that. But outside of that, there wasn't a ton of options. And you really look forward to those things as you get deeper into the night. Either way, we get to this aid station, and they flip the course, and they say, hey, now when you go back, turn this way. And I kind of looked at AJ and was like, all right, you got that? And he's like, yeah, I got it. I was like, okay, good. Because at this point, I can't think straight. I don't know anything. Like, I can't figure anything out. My brain is completely gone. And so we head out of this aid station. We're walking back. It's still dark. At this point, it's probably, I don't know, 4 a.m., something like that, which means it'd been dark for 10 hours, 11 hours. And so at this point, you're just like, holy shit, like, I can't believe we're even in this mess. I can't believe I signed up for this. But you just keep moving. And I just kept moving, and AJ kept moving. We get to this turning point where the course is supposed to change, and we realize, like, oh shit, we might not have paid enough attention to where to turn or how to turn or where to go. And a couple minutes prior to that, I had talked to my coach. My coach had called AJ on his phone, and my coach, Matt Johnson, shout out Matty J, was like, Trip, you have to hold this pace to finish, period. Like, this is the number. This is what you have to do to finish and beat the cutoff. Like, you've got this. And so we get to this point where we don't know where to go. And some people are going left. Some people are going right. Some people are going straight. And I just took off. I was like, I'm taking a route here. I'm making a decision. If it's wrong, I'll deal with those consequences later, but I don't have time to wait. So we kind of bolted off. Well, of course, I took the wrong turn. I went the wrong way. And we probably went an additional like mile and a half out of the way. And I'm like, shit, like a mile and a half out of the way doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's a massive deal when you talk about 100 miles. Like that extra mile and a half it weighs on you. And so we get a mile and a half out. We realize we're in the wrong. We kind of find the main road that leads back into camp. And we're like, all right, I still have to get back before the cutoff, before the last lap. And that's coming up fast. I mean, it was creeping up quick. And so we hustle to get back to the start finish line. I think we crossed the start finish line with 20 minutes to spare before the cutoff, I want to say. And I was at mile 86, which was too far, right? So we're too many miles in at this point, which means I was going to finish well over 100, but I didn't care. I was like, all right, I did the math again. I knew my pace. I knew what we had to do. And I just told AJ, I was like, take my pack, take everything. And you go to camp, get with Brett, because Brett was going to pace the last lap. Give him everything, get everything set up. I'm going to keep moving. I'm not going to stop, because if I stop, we're not finishing this thing. And so we didn't stop between the last two laps. I just kept going. Matt met me out on the trail with a Red Bull. I shotgunned a Red Bull real quick. Brett was loaded down with gear and like all the different fuel and everything we needed. And we just kept moving. You know, he had this, it was like a pint of honey he was carrying with him. And like, I swear every minute and a half we would stop and he would just squeeze this honey into my mouth. That's what was keeping me alive. And, we just kept moving and realized as we got closer, we were on pace, but not by much, meaning there wasn't a lot of room to slip. So it was just like, we have to keep moving. I just kept telling myself, like, how bad do you really want this? Are you willing to die for it? Are you really about everything you say you're about? Or are you full of shit? And so I just kept leaning into that. And when I wanted to stop or slow down, I'd think about the kids back home in Roanoke, Virginia. And I'd made a post prior to saying, like, I'm going to show you guys, you know, no matter what's stacked up against you, you just keep moving forward. And so I kept playing that back in my mind. The person who has come into my life that I've gotten close with and we're building something special, she kept coming into my mind of like, who am I? What kind of man would I be if I quit during this? Like, I got to be able to show out. I got to be able to finish the job. I got to be able to prove that once I commit to something, that's it. And so I leaned into that. I thought about my mom, my stepdad. I just leaned into all these things. I thought about the Kuhn family. For those of you that don't know, I've talked about it on here before, but the Kuhn family is near and dear to my heart. I thought about my buddy Will Fenwick, Greg Keys, Morel Harrell, guys that have paced me in previous races, my boy Petey, everybody who's been along for this journey. And I know I'm leaving out names and it's not intentional, but it's been so many people that have just stuck by me through this. And so I leaned into that and I was like, are you going to quit on them too? And the answer was no. So we just kept moving. We realized probably like the watch clicked over to 100 and we still had 2 miles to go, or just under 2 miles to go. And so at that point I was like, well, Trip, you covered 100 miles. So like, good job on that. Just finished the deal. I had probably an hour left to finish the last 2 miles. And I think we finished with 19 minutes to spare. We crossed the finish line. I was elated. I was happy, but I think I expected to have this like big explosion of emotion at the finish line, and it wasn't that at all. It was this moment of realizing I know exactly why God wanted me to do this distance now. And that's what I want to talk about for a brief minute here. At the finish line, everybody, the Pacers were there. One of my Pacers had the special person I'm telling you about on FaceTime, so she could watch. She couldn't be there because she had another event to do. They brought my dog, so Tex was at the finish line, which was awesome. He crossed the finish line with me. But I crossed the finish line. They hand you your belt buckle, and it's honestly pretty anticlimactic. It's like, okay, like did that. But I knew, kind of when I crossed the finish line that the biggest part of the race had already happened, and what mattered had already happened. And that's what I want to talk about. That fifth loop where it was dark, it was rainy, it was cold. I could barely move. I felt like there was a mile in there. We did it in like 46 minutes. I mean, it was bad. It was ugly. That's where I grew. That's why I signed up for the race. It was for miles 66 through 84. Because there were moments in there, and this might be graphic, but it's real, and this happened. It was literally the darkest point of my life, that lap. And it forced me to face everything that I've kind of shelved or covered up with my ego or my pride over the years, or my strength or like my grit. All that shit was gone. It was just me in my rawest form. And I got to see really what was left, kind of like who I am as a man and what exists. Once you shed all that other shit off, you realize what you're really made of and what it looks like. And I got to see that for the first time, up close and personal. And I was proud of a lot of the things I saw. Then there was a lot of things I saw. I was like, ooh, like we're going to need to work on this. This is something that we need to deal with. We need to confront, face on, and make sure that this isn't something we carry, to the next phase with us. So it was dark. There was some, I don't want to call them suicidal thoughts, but there was some pretty dark thoughts in there. I mean, there's a bridge out on the course, and it crossed my mind at one point, like, well, if I just go over the side of this bridge, like that's a noble way to go out. No one would ever assume that I did it. They would just think I was hallucinating or delusional. And I don't share that to scare people into thinking that I'm having reoccurring suicidal thoughts. It's certainly not that. It's more that at that point I was so raw and vulnerable. Like you have some wild thoughts. It's just the real. You think about some crazy shit. You're walking through the woods and you see floating eyes everywhere, and you know that they're coyotes, and you understand in that moment that we are small game in this world. We are prey in this world. We are weak. And it really, I think it really helps you recenter not just who you are, but who you want to be, who you want to become. And so that was certainly my experience. So I think the whole race for me was between, like I said, those miles I just talked about. The last lap, it was just grit, right? It was just get it done, feel the pain, move through it. And so I look back on it and like, I definitely don't want to glorify myself. I think God is the primary reason that it got done. I think there was a message there for me, and a message that I could share with others that hopefully will help them, that God gifted me with in that moment. But outside of that, people always want to know right after, like, what's next? Are you going to do something bigger? And like, the answer to that is, I don't know. I don't know if I really see the need to go back to that place, as long as I can address what I uncovered in those moments. That being said, those of you that follow along know that we have another 100-miler in February, the Rocky Raccoon 100, and that is the redemption race. That's the one that got me the first 2 years, and that's the one I want to go face to face with and see what happens. But it's not about the distance anymore. Now I understand it's about the growth that happens within the distance, within those parameters. And so I'm excited now to step back into that lane and kind of finish this 100-mile journey off. I don't foresee myself doing any 100-milers after Rocky Raccoon. I don't really have a lot of interest in it, but I do want to close the chapter correctly And I want to make sure that I continue to show those. Like, just because something beats you once or beats you twice doesn't mean you can't show up a third time and whip its ass. And so I'm leaning into that. All that being said, post-race injury, body, feet, like that sort of thing, I was good, fortunately, by the grace of God. And I think a lot of it had to do with my training volume, the work that went in prior to the race on my body, just making sure that it was dialed as possible. But, there's no replacement for heavy volume. I've learned that. And shout out to Matt Johnson again for teaching me that. I don't know how many 70-mile weeks we ran leading up to this race. It was grueling. It was exhausting. But what happened was, when I got out on that course, I didn't feel anything for those 31 hours that I hadn't felt in training. That's why training is important. Because when that happens and you feel these things in the race, you're like, no, I know I'm good because I felt this before and went out and ran 10 miles. Or no, I know I'm good because I felt this before and I finished the run and been able to recover well. Like, all these mental factors are at play. So I didn't feel anything new other than my quads. So after the race, I was sore. Don't get me wrong. My feet hurt bad. The feet were probably the worst of all of it. And then there was some tendonitis headed into the knees that I've been working on. But I took a week off completely of running. I was lifting weights and sauna and plunging and that sort of thing. But this past week, we've kind of started moving the body again. We've picked up some mileage. We've put a little bit of focus on that. And I'm feeling good. But I wanted to give you guys the full picture of that race. This is a shorter episode just because I'd said, like I'd said on the pre-race, if you don't see me again, this is why. Well, here I am. Here we are. And we're going to keep going. We're going to keep pushing the envelope. I have no clue what that looks like, other than in February, we're going to show up and hammer Rocky Raccoon. The rest is TBD. But I can assure you this much. Whatever we decide to do, it isn't going to be about me. It's going to be to further the story, to show others that literally anything is possible and achievable as long as you put your mind to it and you put in the work. And that's quickly become my purpose in life, and how I can help or be of service to others. So that's where we're at. I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening. I hope that wasn't too scatterbrained, but that's my post-race Brazos Bend 100 story. I love you all. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.